Her Bak, Chapter 6. It was full moon over a desert tract, surrounded by palm trees. Students and disciples, seated in a semicircle, looked like statues. Pale light illuminated perplexed faces. Silence closed every mouth while the magician withdrew. When, a shadow among shadows, he disappeared, every eye went to a circle drawn on the ground, as if expecting some fresh enchantment. Mystic and symbolist watched, talking in low voices. The mystic questioned Abu Shed. "What do you think of the spectacle that was offered? Speak without hesitation." Abu Shed made a face of disgust. "I don't like such phantasmagorias. If they're illusion, I don't like being taken in. If they aren't, it affronts my reason. I reject the world of absurdity." A man who is seeking the real can't say, "I don't like, I reject," without leaving the path. Aob, his eyes still dazed, cried, "The magician is fantastic. Everything he did was a miracle." "For me," said Apuat, "the phenomenon haven't all the same importance. I think one should distinguish." The master approved. Upuat speaks truth. We will sort the tricks into 3 categories. Aob, will you describe what your eyes saw? Aob didn't have to be asked twice. He took a stick and threw it on the ground. The stick became a snake and crept like a snake. He seized it by the tail and pulled. The snake became a stick. Then he did a terrible thing. He cut off a duck's head, and the duck walked, and its head came back on its body. And the 3rd trick was so astonishing I no longer knew where I was. He took some wax, made a monkey with it, recited from a book, and it became a live monkey which ran off among the palms to get dates for its master. When it came back, he recited again, and all that was left was the wax image. The mystic questioned the others. Did each of you see with his own eyes what Aob tells us? They confirmed it with one voice. The master's laughter surprised the students. "Did you see blood flow from the headless duck?" asked the mystic. "Certainly." The magician drew attention to it. "Perfect. Then look for some drops of blood." The students examined the entire surface of the circle but found no blood. The mystics made them sit down. "You won't find what doesn't exist," he said. Then, when they expressed their astonishment, he explained. "A man who sets himself to study causes should be forearmed against illusion. The phenomena produced before you were typical of the chief illusions of which you may become the plaything. The cheapest trick of the 3 was the severed head. The magician existed, the duck existed, so did the spectators, but decapitation took place in your imaginations." Aob protested. The mystic checked him. "You saw the duck and the knife, but from then on the magician created the scene of decapitation and replacement in his thought. He imposed it on you as if you really saw it until the moment when, released from his suggestions, you saw the duck alive at his feet, which it never left." Deeply interested, Her Bak asked, "How could the magician work this miracle?" "A magician can never go against nature. He can change its course, but he must always obey its laws. He can never replace a limb that has been cut off. He can't modify a star's orbit or alter the workings of any essential law. But he can arrest or alter the cerebral consciousness of the spectators. For our senses serve to affirm, not to know." "There's a process," said Apuat, "between seeing and being conscious of what one has seen." "Just so. The brain is a part of it, instrument of memory and comparison, seat of illusion, and Seth's laboratory. Its work is good or bad according to the use we make of it, but the intelligence of the heart is truth and indeceptible. It is awake or asleep or stifled, but there is never evil in it. Abu Shed, humiliated at having let himself be deceived, complained, "How can we have submitted to this imposture? It was an abuse of power." The master rebuked his bitterness. "It was precious experience. You are wrong to regret it. Cerebral illusion is the most frequent of aberrations. The magician, by his control of thought, put your own out of action and made you see a mirage, making illusion, to which you are constantly subject in some small degree, perceptible to you. It is unconsciousness of the mistake that is dangerous." "How can one become aware of it?" asked Her Bak. "Train consciousness by incessant observation. For example, observe the data on which you base your thought. Look at the landscape now. What do you see between those two palm trees?" "A hill," said Her Bak. "Is it larger or smaller than the trees?" "I know it's larger," said Her Bak, "but it looks smaller because it's further off." "Note, then, what you see. Note, too, that with or without your will, it is a process of thought that measures distance and makes you see what you don't see. Without thought, you wouldn't be aware of distance." "Does the sparrowhawk use thought to measure his distance from his prey?" asked Abu Shed, who dissected every process of reasoning. "He doesn't think, he feels it, knows it by experience, just as an ant knows from far off where the tempting morsel is and goes straight to it. The ant will seek for a long time some way of overcoming an obstacle that, as it can't reason, it can't understand. An automatic crossing of notions takes place through our senses, and this is illusion. If you aren't aware of the relativity of your perceptions, how can you detect a reflection thrown into your mind by a master of evocation?" Her Bak didn't hide his disquiet. "Master, what can we think of as true?" "Nothing we ascertain with our senses," replied the sage, "for every sensorial conclusion arises through a play of relationships that a thing is always defined by other things, whereas each of the things can only be known to us by what sense can perceive. The qualities sense can't record escape us. It is this kind of failure that made the illusion of a miracle possible when the wax monkey climbed the tree. This shocked the naive Aoub. But I ate one of the dates. Illusion doesn't lie in the fact, which in this case is true. We are talking now not about suggestion, but about a world or state of whose existence you know nothing because it isn't normally perceptible to your senses. Forces without form and discarnate beings move through our atmosphere without apparent contact with us because their substance isn't the same as ours. We have but one thing in common with them, an emotional life. That in which yields to emotion delivers itself to these influences of this strange world. By rigid discipline, a man can master these forces and make them serve him, for they are eager to borrow a substance in which they can materialize, so as to gain contact with our mode of existence. The magician furnished a substance, wax, and the image of a monkey, but to activate them he had to pronounce a magic formula to which he put them in his power. Then, by his breath and word, they took possession of the image and brought off the desired result. "Marvellous!" cried Aoub. "The man can do anything he wants." "Doesn't he sum up the possibilities in nature? Magic of this kind isn't a marvel but a danger. It's hardly useful to challenge. For emotion is attended by the risk that we shall become the blind victim of invisible powers. It is too easy, unconsciously, to stir up undesirable phenomena and too common. We must learn not to accept projections of the imagination that create fear, sensorial illusion, and forms or phenomena that can be tangible, but such things are no more real than the cerebral consciousness itself. But what is our criterion to be? Asked Abou-Shed eagerly. What are we to call real? What subsists outside our subjective judgment? There can be collective illusion. It can extend to the whole of mankind when it comes to ideas that a line of reasoning, apparently correct, seems to force on us. Your argument is sound, said the mystic. We must have recourse then to experimental and sensorially perceptible proof. Even this will only be valid for things of the same kind. Body affects body, not the emotions. Emotions affect the emotional sense. Spirit, the spiritual. However, bodily fact can be such as to affect the emotions through the attitude we take. Your decapitated duck would have meant nothing to an animal incapable of emotional imagination, since it could only have reacted to the physical fact, so that as the head hadn't been severed, the animal wouldn't have been deceived. The case is otherwise with a dog, which feels fear at a gesture that looks like picking up a stone. What makes illusion, then, is an association of ideas, memory, superimposed on a physical fact. The threat of a sharp point can give a sensation of pricking, fire that of being burnt. Can we say the pricking and burning are illusion? The absence of injury would serve as proof, said Abou-Shed. Unquestionably. But imagination can produce a wound. Where, then, is reality? If we are only willing to consider sensorially recorded experience without subjective reaction as real, our knowledge will be limited to what is material in the universe and can never go outside the bounds of mineral and vegetable life, since the higher animal has reactions that aren't wholly physical. There are 1,000 proofs that animal instinct can obey influences that are analogous and not identical with what lies in nature. In the complexity of the higher ranges of living creatures, above all in men, are possibilities of events that we may call subjective and disputable, but which, for the individual, are no less real than the common facts of sensory experience, since the physical effect arises from vital activity. Abou-Shed seemed uneasy. Doesn't this open the door to dangerous knowledge? Dangerous indeed when it isn't wisely controlled, but infinitely wider than the scope of purely materialist thinking. Note, too, that we are talking now about knowledge, not practice. Try to understand the nature of the phenomenon and your reaction to it without prejudice. Your duck shed no blood. It was only decapitation by your emotions. Emotion acted so strongly on sense and imagination that you saw what the magician's words, his evocative gestures and thought created in your vision. It's exactly the same as the sensation produced by a threat of fire, or of fear in the dog which howls because it feels the stone no one throws. One can die of fright. Thus, however illusory the phenomenon the magician created for you, spectators affected by what they thought they saw is a reality. To the extent that you yourselves are real as live human beings, and to that extent only, then illusion and reality must be indissociable for the man who would pass beyond his mortal nature, suggested Upuat. That way of looking at it is wise. If one adopts it, one may discover an immaterial world, and this progressively, even to fusion with the cause which, although immaterial to our sense, is the sole absolute reality forever and ever. What distinguishes man from animal is precisely this order of consciousness, fruit of a certain independence of the spirit that lives in a mortal body. There flows from this a complex play of feeling and imagination, with reaction on the sense, and if it becomes a source of illusion as regards physical fact, it is also the manifestation of incorporeal mode of existence. The sage confirmed what the master said. All nature feeds on spirit and subsists by spirit. Spirit, that is non-corporeal energy, sensible only by its effects. We are certain of the descent of the imponderable into the ponderable, invisible into visible. It is this that gives force to our teaching. And if the illusions you have just experienced had led only to this consideration, they would have fulfilled their chief purpose. Now, if we put you on guard, not against illusion but ignorance of its possibilities, I must also advise you not to blunt in yourselves, through excessive mistrust, the perception of what is truthful in nature. Mineral, vegetable, and lower animal are not subject to imaginative illusion. You must conclude, you that are human and subject to it, that something in you distinguishes you from the lower kingdoms. To know that illusion is possible is to have a means of gaining the mastery, through the demonstration of sensorial error and discernment of the consciousness complex by which illusion arises. Abu Shed and Her Bak listened eagerly, but Aob's curiosity wasn't satisfied, for nothing had been said about the snake trick. He remarked on this to the master, who replied, "I have shown you two unhealthy aspects of magic. May it please the symbolist to speak about the real thing. Then you'll understand the changing of a stick into a snake." True magic is always positive, the symbolist said. That is to say, it never creates either mental or emotional phantasmagorias. It knows that actual forms are worth nothing, but it recognizes the reality of the causal spirit incarnate in them. It is therefore a use of symbolism in its true meaning, a revelation of abstract cause in the concrete form. This is a cardinal teaching, for causal spirit, discarnate, is incomprehensible. But forms constitute a reality which, however relative it may be, becomes a reality through such revelation. There are then, remarked Her Bak, bringing all his attention to bear, as many possibilities of knowing the universal netter as there are forms. Your heart said that, answered the master. For it is by way of those possibilities that the causal spirit must have passed to become things. When you have learnt the science of, quote, forms in space, end quote, you will see how wonderful such possibility is, truth declaring itself a priori. It is through this and intuition that symbolism can explore a world that is closed to rational thought. Knowing the possibilities of a living form, we can retrace the road that its causal nature, its netter, took, and one can evoke it. But these terms are too dry for the child Aob. He is asleep. Wake up, Aob. I'm going to speak your language. When dog-headed Hetet salutes the young morning sun, when in the name of Benti he sings the glory of Ra at his setting, when at the equinoxes he urinates every hour, when he shows his respiratory power with his great hairy chest and his long dog's nose, all this exhibits his, quote, possibilities, end quote. And so with the ostrich, the crow, the jackal, and every animal, they are born in conditions that demand such habits and characteristics, without which there would be no dog-headed baboon, no ostrich, no crow, no jackal. Ashamed of himself, Aob thanked his master. Now I understand, he said. But what are the possibilities of the snake? The snake is a primary creature without limbs that goes on its belly. Its undulant movement comes from the flexibility of the vertebral column, essential element of its structure. Its other characteristics are the flat head, forked tongue, fangs, and often venom. Venom emphasises the fire character given by the marrow of its long spine. The snake is a thing that glides like a piece of slime. It is the prototype or symbol of all that creeps, vicious, undulant, and is fiery or aquatic according to kind as represented in an image. Figure 11 is the baboon Hetet, greets the young morning sun. I'll send you a picture. Can the symbol of a snake evoke the principle of the snake? Certainly. The magic of analogues calls on the real cause and origin of the natural form, evoking it by the form itself and the essential gesture. You, Aob, did you notice the magician's gesture when he transformed his stick? I saw his hand throw the stick on the ground. Her Bak corrected this. He gave the stick an undulant movement that even made the shape of a snake on the ground. You observed well, Her Bak, and vice versa. When he wished to break the spell, he pulled the snake violently by the tail into a straight line. These evocative actions are typical of the magic of analogues. A cause can only produce varied effects if the genesis of the effect is accidentally modified, as it were, on the way. As if pure water passed through different colouring matters, acquiring different tints, but creating, by the fact that it is water, relationships or analogies between the waters, thus variously tinted. Timidly, Her Bak put a question. Will the serpentine gesture by itself produce the phenomenon? The symbolist smiled. It is likely that you would imitate it in vain. Natural forms must be used in circumstances favourable to the evocation of their cause. This calls for knowledge of the world of causes and the nature of their effects. That is why mastery in this kind of magic is not at all common. Doesn't one see it in funeral rites and images? Asked Abushed, who saw various implications. Why are foodstuffs offered for the dead man's car unless as an evocation? The people themselves practice this imitative magic in thousands of gestures I should be tempted to call sorcery. One must be exact in this sphere, said the symbolist. Rites and images follow what is laid down by those who know. We'll discuss this further at the right moment. As to popular magic, these gestures are a routine adopted through fear. It is a remnant of a traditional knowledge deflected from its educative purpose for purposes of utility. We mustn't confuse mastery with mimicry, knowledge with superstitious ignorance. All the same, Are we to think such practices are effective? True magic is the science of the right gesture, the right word at the right moment. Any departure from this principle makes it ineffective. Are there not kinds of sorcery that work in violation of natural law? Anyone who does this can only turn things from their course temporarily. He will suffer for it sooner or later. I have a horror of such magic, said Abu Shed, but I have often seen a man disquieted by some malevolent gesture recite a formula to attract the beneficent influences of the day. Are such practices of avail? If you were still in the peristyle, I should answer, all depends on the purpose. Besides, if you believe in it, you will get the effect. But to a disciple I will say this: knowledge of analogies is profitable in itself, like all the laws of harmony. One who acquires consciousness of it can mitigate certain inharmonious events, but it is too easy to slide into superstitions that bring on, through imagination, the very evil they claim to exercise. If I congratulate myself on a success, asked Her Bak, or a pleasure, or some advantage, is it wrong to wipe out the ill luck that might follow by using certain gestures or formulas? Such gestures and formulas, the symbolist explained, are meant to make up for any doubts that would jeopardize fulfillment of a wish, or to neutralize the malefic influences of the envious. Such practices may be excused in the ignorant, who defend themselves instinctively. They fetter the man who would leave animality behind. Her Bak asked for a formal ruling. Master, can you tell us whether these are malefic gestures or not? I will give you the truth. Every gesture has repercussions, like a pebble thrown into water, a cry uttered among mountains. Its consequences, harmonious or otherwise, depend on coincidences of time and place, sympathetics or antipathics that it arouses in nature. But man isn't destined to be the slave of mechanical reactions. He is to gain independence of them through consciousness and impersonality. The poor creature who is haunted by fear, ever on the lookout for trouble, is enslaved. Moreover, he creates what doesn't exist. For you, disciple, such an attitude would mean disaster. It prevents the dilation of heart which is indispensable to understanding. It feeds personal anxiety and the timidity that sterilizes. Thanking the master, Her Bak permitted himself a personal remark. Fear disgusts me. I don't understand it. The symbolist explained. Its symbol, snj, I don't know how you pronounce that, snj, which depicts a goose, dead and trust, signifies the paralysis of something winged, a power of movement of which the corpse, like the mummy, is deprived. Fear is a shrinking in the nerve centres, a contraction that can inhibit the life stream, coagulate certain humours, paralyze normal activity. It disorganizes the flow of vital elements, stopping some, changing the course of others. Recall the word ndj, which exposes the constituents of a thing, and you have an idea analogous with disorganization. Is this contraction always harmful? There is no wisdom in your question, Her Bak. Do you know one single natural function that is solely harmful in its action. If Seth didn't exist, would Horus? What is the curdled milk that nourishes you? What means the fear is stimulated in Pharaoh's presence, just as rennet coagulates milk and breaks up its constituents, so the king's presence is understood to act on his subjects with such power that they faint through the seizure that roots them to the ground, suspends the life stream and paralyzes their faculties. This obligatory ritual is a symbolic act of homage to the overwhelming effect of the royal personality. This throws light on the meaning of Sindji and the king's power over his subjects, though I couldn't admit that fear and respect should be allies. But this doesn't apply to fear of the gods, as in the expression fear of mood. Suppose I command you to fear water, returned the symbolist. How would you take it? If you fall into water without knowing how to swim, it will kill you, but the water isn't wicked. It can't be anything but water. In respect that you live underwater, it will work against you, for it can't change its nature, which gives it the power proper to its character, and which, unless it is overcome or changed by some other power, will be destructive. You see then that to fear doesn't mean to have fear, but to take account in consciousness of the characteristic power of each natural force, each principle, each netter. The master fell silent and left the students to meditate his words. Abu Shed addressed the two masters, saying, "As for me, though I'm seeing things today in a very new light, I'm troubled over the difficulty of distinguishing between reality and illusion." Upuat broke in. "An old man who spends his life dreaming in the temples has often told me that all is illusion, not only mental and emotional phantasmagories, but everything that touches our sense, whether the stars or our own bodies." "Upuat touches the bottom of the problem," said the symbolist. "Excellent," said the mystic. "The greatest illusion that can deflect a student is the belief that mysticism is dream life, a search for the netter in nebulous meditation on a remote sky. Mysticism is the way of communication with the cause from which all causes flow. But this can only be done through the matter such causes produce, and the man himself, who is their synthesis and expression. That is why physical consciousness is indispensable for the achievement of knowledge. Without it, one tumbles fatally into imaginative evocation." "This kind of evocation," added the symbolist, "which is the basis of deceptive visions and fantastical revelations, derives from the same mistake as Upuat's old man. If all is illusion, such imaginary projections are no more illusory than the illusion of things." "One illusion's as good as another," said Abu Shed. "If that were true," said the mystic, "there would be no causality, no creative word, no incarnation of it, since form, product of the word's incarnation, would be illusion by reference to its reality, whereas form, which only becomes through the word, is necessarily the word in one of its specificities. All our symbolic teaching stands on this. I must then allow the transitory form, illusory as far as the meaning we attach to it is concerned, is not illusory insomuch as it incarnates an abstract principle or potential function. As our senses are our means of examination, said Abu Shed. The limit of error is infinite. The master took advantage of this to make some essential points. If we observe a thing, he said, the form our senses show us is illusory because it depends on imperfect means of perception. But it is in itself a reality by reference to the causal form or idea. An example, if the word incarnates in a star, the star is real in respect that it is a product of the word, which couldn't, in the circumstances, take any other form. But our sensory understanding of the star is relative, as we can only observe it by a process of comparison. The cerebral function intervenes and sees only the actual form without its relation with the cause, which is the reality. Upuat summed up what he could understand. Then, illusion due to our senses is no more than a suggestion that alters our consciousness of things, but natural form is real and in its relation with its cause. This is right, said the sage. It would be gross error to reject the form of the universe in a world of illusion on the ground that all is appearance. Abu Shed showed impatience. Isn't there something futile about these meticulous definitions? Perception depends on personal sight and understanding. It will vary with each of us. The disciple who was learning geometry cut in with vehemence. How can truth be interpreted arbitrarily? It is absolute. It is number. Number determines form. What is there that is arbitrary in that? I don't accept absolutism, said Abu Shed. A man little endowed for vision of the abstract has the right to think his opinions real, since he conceives it as such in sincerity. Our masters, the young geometer replied, teach that number is universal reality. Sincerity and opinion are relative. There is no equivalence between the two terms. Upuat came in as conciliator. There would be, when sincerity derived from a real and vital experience, if an opinion of an argumentative kind or personal feeling is in question, there is of course no equivalence. A man can't be judge of his neighbour's intelligence, Abu Shed maintained. His own vital experience is never his neighbour's. Clearly, the young geometer agreed. They differ as the properties of two numbers differ, but the law of harmony that governs them is the same, like that which governs your and your neighbour's place in nature. There's nothing arbitrary in these laws. The sage reminded them that no discussion can throw light if it wanders from the real point. The essential elements of our life and reactions are not many, he said, whereas cerebral interpretations are infinitely various, although arguments, not realities. I'm too well aware, said Her Bak, of the difficulty of knowing with the heart instead of arguing, but the sages who bequeathed us their knowledge say there is no other way of understanding it. I should think myself stupid to go on arguing. Aob smiled at him. I don't need to understand, he said. If I free myself from all that is myself, I should know all that isn't. You may, the mystic replied, if you don't forget that your body is the temple of knowledge. He turned to Abu Shed. The pure mystical endowment, renouncing all other inquiry, can acquire by, quote, transparency, end quote, an inner knowledge that is in no way concerned to put into cerebral terms. But the case is very rare. in all others, a religious discipline is necessary to prevent thought from recreating the world and the netters in its own image. That is why we must teach what is in spite of opinion. But no one is obliged to accept the rigours of the temple. All that prattling in the peristyle proves it. However, you will remark it. We never allow it to be written down for posterity. I see the reason for strictness, said Abushed, but it accounts for the monotony of the texts and the wearisome repetition of formulas. Abushed, you have enough proofs not to let yourself be deceived by appearances if you take note of anomalies in the texts. The various arrangements of letters in each word, and even the colour of the signs, you will soon be deciphering riddles of unexpected interest in these banal formulas. If I wasn't sure of it, I shouldn't listen to what impatience whispers me. Who will give me the key? Yourself, if one day you discover the secret of the letters. With regret, Her Bak saw the masters getting ready to go. He made a request in the manner of one who petitions a netter. "O my masters, if I didn't know what rigorous secrecy surrounds the Medu netters, I should ask a question that lies heavily on my tongue." "Lighten your tongue," said the symbolist. "Put your question." It is this. I am looking for the relation between Za, magic power, Sa, Bak, and Sa, sage. You have reason to hesitate. But as you have noticed, we will give what may help to understand it. The power Za has nothing to do with the projection of thought or will, unless in a popular reading and by extension. This word gives the active power of the fire, whose channel is the vertebral column. There are various centres of residence and radiation in our body. It may be Sethian fire, consuming, destructive, when it is constrained or switched to sex or brain. That is why the Bak is said to belong to Seth. But when this fire is subtilized, it is vivifying, quickening. This is the true magic fire, triple in nature, giver of life or death. Is it a power to be feared then? Is it in all men? It is latent in them, but few know how to make use of it wisely. Very few know how to master it. It reaches its perfection in him when a man, being quickened, radiates it without effort on his own, like a life-giving sun. Such a man is a Sar, a wise man, in whom the Horus fire masters the Seth fire and subjects it to his service. The same fire, as yet unevolved, gives the characteristics and signature of the personality Sa or Za, and in its spermatic capacity it transmits paternal characters to the son, Sa or Za, S-O-N. There is figure 12 image. The other vertical form of S is active and causes action, which is why we place this symbol in the hand of certain nobles. I notice, said Her Bak, that it is always the letter S or Z written horizontally that gives the personal and Sethian character, and that of opposition, just so. This letter specifies, separates and particularises, as for instance in SEP, occasion, case, example, division. The vertical form of S is active and activates. It symbolises the vital fire, releases, subtilised, the mastery of which makes human worth. That is why we put the symbol in the hands of certain nobles. You see now the true meaning of S in the royal formula Ankh Wujah Snb, which refers to the two aspects of the fire in perfect balance. This is also the reason for its appearing in the word Snb, which is the same. Are you satisfied, disciple? Her Bak thanked him, saying he hadn't expected such a response. I will add something, the mystic said. Su, SW, means he, but in royal symbols, SW, Su, refers to king of the south. Bit to the king of the north. Yet to designate royalty, Su, not bit, is used. You will see why if you recall what has been taught you. Pharaoh is earthly king. He, the personality par excellence, whose power in action and the functional importance of whose gestures one always tries to affirm. There is a image, figure 13. If the king draws his bow better than any other archer, it is because he is the principle of penetrating power. You're not going to believe the similarity of that left-hand side of that image to the archer in my tarot. Yet to designate royalty, Su, not bit, is used. He is the personality par excellence whose power in action and the functional importance of whose gestures one always tries to affirm. If a king runs, he is that which moves. If to shoot an arrow, he bends the bow better than no matter what archer. He is the principle of penetrative force. At the helm of the sacred bark, he is that which steers. The chariot tarot image. If his hands holds fast the bonds of his prisoners, if he obliges his enemies to serve him as footstool, putting them under his sandals, he is the victorious gesture that subdues hostile powers. He is everlastingly the idea incarnate in action, personified in earthly existence. You may relate suit, therefore, with personality. Earthly concretion, the white crown, Osirian perfection, purity, represented by whiteness. And it is the Neter Osiris, master of the renewal of earthly lives, who defines the phase of terrestrial royalty, each phase of the loop that encloses a king's name. What then does the bee in the symbol of the king in the north mean? Asked Her Bak. The sage rose. Bit refers to the Horus revelation.